Passing by, he saw two fishermen, Simon and Andrew, and called to them, saying, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Were they crazy? I mean, they were leaving behind a good livelihood. These two men owned their boats, owned their nets. And then he goes on a little bit further and he calls two more guys, James and John. And they not only leave their nets and the boats, they leave their father and they leave the hired men. That shows you that these guys were well established. You can't afford to hire somebody to do fishing with you or for you unless you've got some resources. And now they're leaving it all behind to follow this Jesus. Mark doesn't tell us, but I think they must have been crazy. Crazy as loons. I mean, I remember when I first moved out to Santa Fe, it was the height of the harmonic conversions in 1987. It was when people were flocking to places like Santa Fe, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Santa Claus, Sedona, all kinds of places for their spiritual experience. And on the plane out from Connecticut out to Albuquerque, I met three people standing in line or seatmates or whatever who were also moving out to Santa Fe at that time. And I said, "Oh, wow, what kind of work are you going to be doing? Where are you going to be working?" To which, to a person, the reply was, "Oh, we don't have jobs." I said, "You don't have a job? Why are you moving to Santa Fe?" "Oh, we're moving for the ambiance." Once that plane landed, I immediately got on the payphone. It was one of those old phones, that you can call collect, and called a friend of mine and said, "You won't believe this." I said, "I could have been an axe murderer and my mother would have still loved me. But if I'd moved anywhere without a job for the ambiance, I would have been disinherited completely." What are these guys thinking? And we don't hear anything from the father, from James and John's father, or from the hired men. Mark isn't concerned with that. He just wants to get to where he's going. If they're not crazy, were they just misinformed or ill-informed? Maybe they had not heard that this Jesus had come out of the wilderness just like his cousin John, and he was now doing exactly the same things that John had done, preaching the realm of God in the shadow of the realm of Rome, telling people to turn their lives around and to believe the good news that came from God, not from the emperor. He is doing exactly the same things that Mark does insert that little phrase after John was arrested. Jesus is doing exactly the same things that got John arrested. Did Andrew, Simon, James, and John not read the newspaper? Did they not have the internet to let them know what the heck was going on? Hadn't the word spread down from Judea up to Galilee? Maybe they were just misinformed. Or maybe they were just bored. I mean, there are a lot of jobs in this world that are just plain boring. And fishing, at least in my book, has to be one of them. I mean, I'm sorry. I realize I'm preaching to the choir over here who love fishing, who love more than anything else to go out in a boat but you don't do it with nets. You do it with a rod, right? And just cast that sucker time and time again and just sit there. Just sit there. Just sit. And even if you were doing it with a net, number one, you either have to go late at night or early in the morning, because that's when the fish are there, right? You don't go out in the middle of the day when you can actually see yourself or see the fish. And you keep throwing out your net and then hauling it back in, and it may or may not have fish in it. And the fish it has in it may be as small as sardines, so you have to throw them all back. It's not the most creative work that God ever created. So maybe they were just bored, And the idea of becoming fishers of people was a lot more interesting and a lot less smelly than fishing for fish. Maybe. We simply do not know why those 4 young men abandoned everything to go follow this Jesus. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. Because if we don't know what motivated them, then we can't dismiss what they did. We can't say, well, we wouldn't do the same thing because we're not motivated by the same thing. Because this story, my friends, is not just about those fishermen 2,000 plus years ago. It's about you and me here at United or online. It's about why did you show up today? And what does that mean? What does that mean in your life? And what does it mean in the life of this world? Now, there's all kinds of reasons why people engage in a community of faith. There's this old story about 2 Jewish guys, Moshe and Jacob. And one of them doesn't believe anything at all about anything having to do with Judaism, Moshe. But he goes to temple every single week. And finally somebody says, Moshe, why do you go to temple? You don't even believe this stuff. Why do you go to temple? He goes, well, my friend Jacob goes to temple to talk to God. I go to temple to talk to my friend Jacob. And I realize that is a very powerful motivation, to be with friends, to be connected to other people. But is that enough to leave your entire livelihood behind? To put your life on the line as these disciples did and the women who followed Jesus following in that way? Maybe. But I think this story invites us to consider, what does it mean? What does it mean to be part of a community of faith that is a Christian community of faith? What does it mean to engage this scripture, which is about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? What does it mean to follow in the ways of Jesus? Because no matter what motivated you to come today or to tune in, that's what a church is about. Figuring out, what does it mean to follow in the ways of Jesus Christ? What does it mean for us individually? What does it mean for us as a church? And those are the questions we need to wrestle with, especially right now. Not just today, but in the weeks to come. We're coming up on the 4th anniversary of March 15th, 2020, which was the last time this church had an in-person service for over a year. We're entering into the month of February, which was when, at least in the United States and in New Mexico, we were beginning to get an awareness of this new thing called COVID. And I don't know about you, but I had no clue how it was going to turn the world upside down. Our individual lives, the life of this nation, this world, this church. I still remember driving home after March 15th, after the service on March 15th. We gathered in here, a very small group of people. Everybody was masked. Everybody was sitting 6 feet apart. We'd carefully marked things off. The choir wasn't singing. In fact, the service had already been planned. Bulletin was already printed, but we didn't even do any hymn singing. We did hymn humming for that service. And the public schools in New Mexico had just been shut down for 3 weeks. School vacation followed by 2 weeks. And I was thinking, how are we going to get through the next 3 weeks? No church. That evening, the CDC declared that this thing was going to go on for at least 3 months. And you and I, we all know it went on for a lot longer than 3 months. And not only did it turn things upside down for organizations like churches, but the reality is, even coming out of the pandemic, we're not going back to 2019. That's one reason why we're taking time next week to look at how life has changed, both for each of us individually, but also as a church community over the last 4 years. And even, my friends, without the pandemic, this may be very bad news and you may not have thought of it, but some of us are 4 years older. And that has had an impact on this church as well. And so in this time, we need to pay attention to what have we been called to over the last 4 years, and what is God calling us to now, in our own personal lives and in our life together. It's not a new question for us. We've been wrestling, every church needs to wrestle with that on a regular basis. It's why a number of years ago we changed the ministry team that we used to call membership development to discipleship development, because there's a big difference between the two. Membership is something we do joining a club, a team, a study group. Discipleship is a whole different kettle of fish. We need to engage that question, because we're all somehow engaged with the life and ministry of the United Church of Santa Fe. No matter what particular group we connect with, if we're in this room, if we're tuning in, it's the question of discipleship. Why follow? And what are we called to? And what are we willing to sacrifice, to do? And how have the last 4 years changed that understanding? One of the things I remember as we entered into the pandemic, I think Larry Rasmussen, you were the one who brought it to my attention, and I saw it in other places as well then, that the prediction for local churches was that they would be coming out of the pandemic leaner, meaning fewer members, but more committed. Now, the leaner part, I haven't managed to work on, but the committed part, I think, is something we have managed to move into. But to be the church in this day and age is no easy task, and we don't take anything for granted. And my hunch is that those disciples began to see that right away. That to respond to the call, to be a person of faith, to be a disciple, to follow in the ways of Jesus Christ, isn't just a once-for-all, one-off decision. It's a daily one, sometimes an hourly one. It's why when we baptize children or adults, when we receive new members, when we do the renewal of baptism, as we will in just a few moments, one of the questions is, do you renounce the powers of evil and seek the freedom of new life that God offers? That is not a one-time yes or no. It's an every day, sometimes every hour choice. So my friends, I appreciate your being willing to engage such questions. I'm grateful that Mark doesn't give us a reason for why those 4 men did what they did, or why the women who followed Jesus did what they did. Because it makes us figure out, why do we do it? And what are we being called to now? And my hunch is that, like those disciples, there are times we don't have any more of a clue than what they did. And that's why it's important to come together Important to sing songs that remind us what we're about and what we're called to do and be. Why it's important to hear the voices of other people, both within the congregation and those who have gone before us. People like Howard Thurman, whose prayer we used, to remind us of our need with every breath we take for God's redeeming love and power in our lives. I was reminded of all that this last week when I received news of the death of Professor Leander Keck, who'd been the dean of Yale Divinity School my last couple of years, and also when I was teaching at Yale. He was 95, brilliant mind, Methodist background, big heart. Led the school in some trying times. And one of the things that was written about him, that the current dean wrote about him, was a quote from Keck's inaugural service when he became dean. You'll find it on the front cover of the bulletin. And for me, it's at least one of the marching orders that we have as people of faith. Keck said, "The future is as promising as we have wit and wisdom to proclaim. Human hurt is too deep, moral issues too pressing for us to be satisfied with less than our best." Jesus called to them and said, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." And immediately they dropped their nets and followed him. God needs all the wit, wisdom, faith, courage, and hope that you and I can muster, individually and as a church. Let's have at it. Thanks be to God. Amen.